I will press the record button. I will press the record button. I press the record button. And we're live. Welcome everyone to our fourth webinar of the series. This one is called Building a Challenge Matrix. And I'm glad to see all of you being here for the first time or coming back. I pushed it all right. Okay, so I also got a clicker this time. It's the clicker I actually use at the university master courses I do. Let's see if it works. It should work, especially if I focus on the presentation. It should work. It should work. Yeah, doesn't work. Next time maybe. So we're gonna be talking about building a challenge matrix for the player. What does this exactly mean? Because it's not necessarily level design, it might as well be related to game design. I'd say it's 50-50. So let's see now. I'm your host, Victor. Tonight we are fortunate enough to have Irina help us moderating the entire session. And as usual, the schedule, 10 minutes of warm-up. We already did that. 5 minutes about me and a few updates, a few very nice updates. 20 minutes I'll be talking a bit about the challenge matrix. 10 minutes Q&A and 15 minutes bit of info about the upcoming course. There's quite a bit to update there, especially since some of you might have the special perk with the Discord group, and that's gonna start soon. But anyway, we'll get to that. As usual, please be polite. There have never been problems, nor will they be, because everyone here is super awesome. Asking questions in the chat. I will try to answer them live as we go, or I will get back to them during the Q&A. Thank you everyone so much for joining. And let's see. If something is broken, try to reconnect. So, why am I doing this? Well, as you know, I'm building already a course about learning level design. This is our Indiegogo campaign, and if you can actually see there, we had taken this screenshot at $185 raised. However, this morning, when I was preparing the materials for this webinar, we actually got to $375 raised. And just before we started the webinar, we actually went to $440 raised. So backers are starting to jump aboard because probably they also want to book a ticket at this premium course now while it's still in development, and they can access it for a decent price, not to say insanely low. I've actually been criticized by a few colleagues who have in-person physical courses here in Zagreb, telling me I'm actually lowering the price a bit too much. Okay, so I'm an expert level designer with 12 years of experience. I've worked in several AAA titles, Ghost Recon, Future Soldier and Wildlands, Watch Dogs 1 and 2, FIFA as a producer, Rabbids Go Home, the game from the Raving Rabbit series, again just to name a few. Cabela, Dangerous Hunts 2, for those who are into old hunting games. Harley Davidson, Race to the Rally, for those who are into PlayStation 2 racing titles. So, I've seen my fair share of the games industry, most of it from the level design perspective. I did work on multiple platforms, so almost every title I've worked on was released on at least 2 platforms, if not more. And throughout my career, I have used, I guess, more than 6 or 7 engines from various companies. That's why I always say it's the hardest for me to help you guys understand level design as a school of thought, because engines we can always learn. It's just technical, you just learn where the buttons are and you press them. However, what buttons to press and in what order and what's your plan, your vision for that level, that's something trickier to learn. So that's what I hope I'll be able to do by providing everyone with this course. So let's see now. We're gonna talk today about challenge matrix, how to build it, what it is. But before we get there, let's just go back a bit through what we already discussed during the previous courses about the challenges for the player. So I'd like to remind those of you that already were at the previous webinars, or for those of you who are here for the first time, the whole thing about the challenges for the player. We as humans play games solely because we like solving challenges. And some of you might remember the brain and eyeballs. We are carrying around in our head the world's best problem-solving machine. Each and every one of us has one of it. Sometimes we don't use it enough, but hey. So, we need to exercise it. That's why even people in their 70s or 80s play video games, because our brain is literally asking us to give it problems to solve. Nowadays, life is much easier than it was, a few 100 years ago. So we have less and less common daily problems to solve. So that's why we go towards games. So everything we'll be talking about relating to challenges and how we order them will happen on this graph. So 2 axes, one of them, the horizontal one, speaks about the time any player spends playing. It varies from individual to individual, but you'll soon understand what I'm talking about. And the vertical one talks about difficulty. I want you to look at this in the following way. Any kind of game difficulty, any kind of challenge can be mapped on this chart, like so, for instance. Here I draw extreme difficulty, if you like. So I'm putting in a challenge which is very, very difficult for the player. From like the 3rd or 4th minute he starts playing my map or my game. So is everyone clear on this? This is a hard difficulty, right? Can you tell me how this looks like? Yes, Bogdan, that's like super easy. What do you think happens when players are playing a game that gives them this kind of challenge, so to speak, of non-challenge, if you'd like? What do you think happens to players who play a level or a game you made that is dumb easy? Exactly. Exactly. So yes, it gets real boring real fast. If I can go back to the slide, that thing gets bored. It goes like, nah, this is not challenging enough. Go fetch me another challenge, human. So this is super hard, and here we get scared and frustrated, and this is super easy, and it gets boring real fast. Most of the games that fail to be discovered, even though they had good marketing and good campaigns and good graphics and a solid story, fail because they're either too hard, or too easy. Okay, but then how would a regular game look like? This is exactly how a game has to look like, regardless of how long the actual time spent playing, and regardless of the difficulty we're proposing. So if I'm crackling, I'll lower a bit the volume, tell me how it sounds now. So, how do we achieve this? Because even this might seem like a clear recipe. Well, the solution we use as professionals in the games industry is doing something like this. This is actually how it looks like in games. We challenge you a bit. Too quiet, okay. So, back to regular volume. We challenge you a bit, then we let you get comfortable with what we've challenged you for a moment of time, like a few minutes, half an hour, depending on the scale we're talking about. Then you go up in challenge again, we introduce a new game mechanic, for those of you who've been at the first webinar about game mechanics. And then you start to get comfortable with them, then we introduce a new kind of enemy, then you start to get comfortable again, and so on. Okay. Let's say the first thing we usually introduce in any kind of game, it's movement. Exactly, that's called the flow. Getting them into, actually it's the challenge versus flow versus engagement. So it's challenge versus engagement. But yeah, let's call it flow. Flow is also when players understand what they have to do, so they actually move on this one. But that's a good one, Deadlight. So the first thing we usually introduce in games is movement. That's basically how any game starts. If you remember, you have a tutorial at the start that says press WSAD to move, or the stick if you're on the controller, and you kind of get used to movement. Immediately after you get used to the movement part, it starts to get boring, but then usually games introduce jumping. Let's say it's a platformer or a shooter, whatever. We present you with a few challenges about jumping, you kind of get comfortable with them too, and it starts to get boring. But then we introduce shooting, if it's a first-person shooter. You get comfortable with it, but then we introduce dodging. So we put in enemies that can also fire back and you have to dodge them, and that keeps you busy for a while. Then we introduce grenades. I chose the G for grenades in this case, where you learn how to throw grenades in complex arcs and with complex puzzles. And usually, even if we're talking about a level or the entire game, it has to end in an epic boss fight, because that's where we put everything together and we challenge the player one last time before we finish the game. This is how it should look like. It's the same thing, it's correct. It still keeps this 45-degree line between the time spent playing and the difficulty, but it adds a bit of variation, so you don't actually see the linear increase of difficulty as the time goes by. Let's make a quick exercise now. It's an interactive exercise. So I'll get this little, star here in the corner, and you tell me where I should place it. If we're talking about putting a big boss right at the start of the level, where in this chart would the star fit? If we go loco and we put a big boss right at the start of the level, at the start of the game, at the start of the first level of the game. Where would it fit? Higher on difficulty, exactly. So let me actually edit this as we speak. Big boss right at the start, right? So it should be max difficulty at 0 time. It wouldn't feel that constructive, right? Okay, so as I've mentioned before, CTV is a level designer, and yes, we do have some industry examples. I'm sorry to hear about that. Hopefully they'll get it better next time, and probably they've learned their lesson. Okay, let's go for another one. What if I ask you just to move the character around? I still have a star. Where should I put it on the graphic? Exactly, low difficulty. Cool. Now, I ask you to move, which we already said it's a low difficulty, and then to jump. So first you move, and afterwards you jump. Move, then jump. Where would jump be next to move? Slightly higher difficulty. That's brilliant, Martin. Yes. Exactly. Let's say it can move a bit, so it can be like almost next to move. It can be a bit higher, depending on the jump you propose. Is it a wall run jump? Is it more complex? It's still debatable, but everyone is on the same track. But let's say now we're going for a, whoops, let's say we're going for a, exactly. Move, jump, and then I ask the player to move plus jump. So to, let's say, jump plus move, use a jumping pad. This is the yellow star. Where should I put this one? Which is a combination of the previous two. Great, Martin. Exactly. So this is basically how me as a level designer, I think of building difficulty in the level. I don't necessarily think about what I would like to play in the level, because maybe I've played the game 1,000 times while it's in production already. I think about what I want to give the players as a challenge. And usually that's what we have to do, especially if we want to build a game that's like a commercial success. If we just want to build the game for ourselves, then we can build it any way we want. Okay, so now let's go back into presentation mode. There we go. Again, this is how we should look like, with the gradual introduction of mechanics and culminating with a test of all the mechanics we have in the game. And we can apply this to an entire game. Yes, CTV, technically you are correct. So CTV is asking, shouldn't we have the star on the same level with J? Technically, that's a maybe yes, but practically, because we're actually asking the player to combine the jump and the movement, like let's say moving in the air, that's why I consider it to be a bit difficult. However, take it with a grain of salt, it really depends on the situation. It definitely won't be below the J. Okay, so the recap, this is how we string them together for a game. And for instance, if we look at how we organize levels, let's say I have a difficulty curve for the levels. This is how I would think to organize my entire level content for a game. Level 1, pretty challenging. Level 2, I get used to the new shotgun you found in the game. Level 3, I up the challenge a bit. Level 4, I let you get used again to the power armor and the double jump you just learned, and so on. For instance, look here at level 6 to 8, I can decide as a level designer to make a few levels in succession be comfortable for the player. At the same time, closer to the end of the game, level 11 to 13, I could challenge the player a bit more there, to keep him more in a tense state. Then I'd switch him back to a rather easy level so he can get his reward, replenish his ammo and loot and whatever I have in the game, and then I send him to the final boss where he's super challenged and everything is hardcore difficult and it will test his skills, all the skills for this game. Okay, but at the same time I can apply this to every level in the game. So I can first apply it to the game and to how levels are structured in the entire game, but I can also apply it to each and every level in the game. Let's take this assumption about having a game, a level, where we basically spawn and we have to find the key which unlocks a door that this time is guarded. And maybe we create a diversion, which is super easy because we have some exploding barrels which, when exploding, attract the enemies. This way we can enter the room, but still pretty difficult because we have to synchronize with the enemy guards living away, and that makes us solve a complex problem. In that room we find some loot and a few enemies, and we eventually get to a final encounter, let's say with a mini boss of that level. So this would be, let's say, the default difficulty for a cliche level, if you want. However, we can bring in some flavor. Look at how the curve changed just by saying, okay, the door is guarded, but the diversion is super simple. You have like a clear path towards the diversion. However, when you want to enter the room, not all the guards from the door live towards the diversion. So you actually have to combat with them. You have to find solutions for how to combat those guards. Let's also say that inside the room you do find loot, but you also find lots of enemies. So you're still in that tense state. It's still difficult. You're still trying to find solutions for a problem of bigger difficulty. And let's say we want to push it even more, and exactly as you're finishing off the last waves of enemies in that room, we get the final encounter with the level's mini-boss. Or we can give it, a bad flavor. If I make the spawn and I make it really difficult for you to find the key, really difficult, and the door is clear, so why should you look so much for a key when the door is clear anyway? And then you enter a room in which maybe there's no loot and no enemies, and you have to just navigate through a whole lot of empty room. Just so you can make your way to a final boss that's actually pretty easy to defeat because he's just a regular enemy. This is an example of a bad balancing. This usually doesn't work, and players usually give up at finding the key. They try to look for it, they don't have enough clues in the map, they don't understand why they need the key because the door is clear anyway, and eventually they leave your game. Okay, let's see this one. Not good? Yes, Aldi, good question. It's highly dependent on what happens before and after, because I might want to slow things down for the players to breathe. However, I would not use an entire level as a slowdown. Okay, depends again on the context, how long is the level, etc. But I wouldn't go into building such a flatline level, especially because of, again, the difficulty curve. I'm way far away from the 45 degree regular degree where I know players will stay in the game. And especially because I don't give them anything to do, they won't even consider it as a chance to catch a breath. If I would give them a BFG though, or any kind of like super weapon and spawn just a few silly little enemies with which the player can have fun, then it would be what you're describing, just a chance to catch the breath, get back into the flow, etc. Okay, how about this one? I spawn and it's really difficult to find the key. I have to solve like 17 puzzles just to get to the key. I eventually get to the key, however, I have to travel a long distance to get back to the door, which is fully guarded. And I don't have any kind of diversion to make there. Exactly. Easy as heck. So when I enter the room, there's even more enemies and I don't find any kind of loot and all the enemies, and assuming I kind of managed to do it somehow around here, then a super mega boss shows up. Again, this is a really bad example because we're completely over challenging the player by proposing a difficulty way too big for the game. So, about how to build each one, it's rather easy. You just stick to the pattern. The biggest question would be, how do I actually implement this into my game? Well, if you remember the discussion about game mechanics, the first thing you gotta do is draw your game mechanics, put your game mechanics on paper, and measure how difficult they are. Only then will you know exactly how your level difficulty is. If you know how each level difficulty goes, then of course you can assemble them inside the entire level progression from your game. So that's how we usually go about as professional level designers to build a challenge matrix for our game. Again, this is just a tiny scratch on the surface. We'll be talking about a lot more of this because we'll have a lot more time during the level design course. However, do you have any questions and answers based on what we already discussed so far? Okay, so Deadlight is asking if I think it's better to design the actual map first and then add the objectives, or the objectives and design the map around them. I will let CTV answer this one as well. So CTV, feel free to type it in and how you go about. But it's optimal if you put everything as much as you can on paper to state your intention, to balance it out on paper, because working on paper is zero effort. It doesn't cost that much. Working in the editor to build the actual map takes you 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 months at times. And then after you've built it all, you just realized, oh snap, it doesn't work properly in the whole curve of the game. So me, in my 12 years of experience, CTV in his 10 plus years of experience, and everyone here who's professionally a level designer usually goes about putting their intentions on paper, drawing on a paper napkin, a really silly doodle of the map, of each map, stringing them together, thinking about what enemy fits in what part. And you'll love this one. Form follows function, right? What I mean by this. you need, for instance, in the third map of the game, you determine you need enemies with rocket launchers. Then you need to find inspiration in your game's world, in your game's concept art, or to do your own research, find pictures on the internet, etc., of spaces that would fit properly a rocket launcher level, a rocket launcher fight level. You can't design something and then go in and say, now let's make it work with rockets and explosions. Let's say you draw something with really tight hallways. The player is toast there. He can't avoid them, he can't see them coming from a distance, so you can't necessarily force it on the player to just say, now you gotta play with rocket launchers because that's what we need in this map. Okay, Bogdan is asking if he needs to know how to draw for designing a level. You don't need to know how to draw on a professional artist level. If you can draw a wobbly line from left to right and from top to bottom, you're usually okay. It's just about schematics. You're welcome, Deadlight, for the previous answer. So drawing, again, I can make a simple example talking about the RPG stuff I mentioned earlier, the rocket launcher map. So for me, this would be a pretty decent proposition for an RPG map. Let's say I'd have a road. I'm actually drawing something now. I'll show it at the camera in a second. And I hope it's visible enough. Let's see if I can get it. Up, 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 up. Okay. So let's say I have a, I'm trying to sync. I have some central landmark here. I've got a few buildings on the sides, right? Oops, on the sides, sorry, like so. And I have a, let's see if I get it. And I have a road that goes this way. So yeah, Bogdan, the gods of game development were merciful upon us level designers. We don't necessarily need to have fantastic drawing skills. However, you should be able to capture on a piece of paper or in your favorite digital software, MS Paint, Photoshop, whatever, you should be able to capture your intentions. First of all, because we're all humans and we kinda tend to forget. And secondly, because it's very easy to review your intention with a fellow level designer if you just show him a drawing and go like, yeah, this is where the player will spawn, that's what I wanna do, and I wanna use rocket launchers in this map. Okay. How to judge difficulty. Martin is asking how to judge difficulty as developer familiar with game and its mechanics. And Aldi, thanks for stepping in with the perfect answer. Playtest, playtest, playtest. Indeed. So everything about difficulty is not for us to say as developers, especially because we go into gameplay fatigue. We usually play so many times the game starts to become easy. You can't believe how many of my colleagues, and me including, on any game we work for more than 3 or 4 months, become in that specific game headshot experts, stealth experts, quick run experts, the works. So yes, playtest. During the level design course, if you sign up for it, or if you already have signed up for it, I'll actually give you the layout of how to build your own playtest questionnaire. So at any playtest, when you ask people to play your map, you go in and for part of the things, you literally ask them questions, as in, how did you find that vehicle? What made you think about it, etc. Whereas for like a smaller part of things, you just write something down on your list and you observe if they achieve it or not. You can't go in with questions for all the things you want to find out about your level and how it actually works when they're playing it, because by asking the question, you might actually give them the solution. And basically that kills the playtest. Okay. So Deadlight is asking, if it comes to balancing, you have multiple paths to the end of the level. Do you think it's important to keep the risk-reward ratio as equal as possible across the board, or do you think it's all right to leave paths that are tremendously more advantageous take? So, it's again a complex question. However, I do believe the racing games shortcuts are there for a reason. So I have the obvious path, which usually also contains a power-up or two, but then I have the shortcut. However, because the shortcut does optimize a lot of time, it's also balanced by being narrow, not allowing two players to enter at the same time. So if we're competing, we actually have to strategize if we fight for the shortcut with a high chance of winning, or if we drop out of the race for the shortcut and go back on the normal track. So I do believe you need to have variations. However, if I promise you this, and this again you'll find out by playtesting, playtesting, playtesting. If any one of the possible options is super, super, ultra advantageous compared to the other ones, I promise you, all the players will use that as being the single path existing in that part of the world map. So that's why playtesting helps us a lot, because then we can also balance the options, the multiple paths we have in a level, in the world's map. So this takes me back to what I said earlier in our first, second, and third webinar. Put your intentions on paper. If you literally say, for my 3 paths of the level, I have a distribution of 30% usage, 30% usage, and 40% usage, you could literally verify your intention during the playtests. Yes, dominant strategy scenarios. Usually try to keep away from them. The only exception would be multiplayer games where you want to create a hot point in the map. So I present there the dominant strategy, I don't know, a button that turns the entire floor, except for where you press the button, into electric shocks or something, and basically everyone who's on the floor gets a health penalty or gets killed. So I would put such a thing in a place of the map where I would like players to gather around and dispute for it. And of course, even that I would have built with some trade-offs, like it would be super vulnerable to distant sniper fire, it would have some explosive barrels next to it, so when you try to press the button, another player can shoot the barrel and invalidate your actions. Yes, it's game balance somewhat. I actually consider this to be more level design balance, because we're free to use the already balanced ingredients, and if we don't do it right with the perfectly balanced game ingredients, we still go into a big disproportionate unbalanced map in our case. Players will like to maximize. Overpowered items should be avoided. Yes, Aldi. So technically any kind of OP should be avoided, but at the same time, remember that in Quake we fight for the quad damage. So the jury is still out on that one. Rarefied, exactly. So I feel like intended play is somewhat different from dominant strategy, in the sense that it doesn't ruin the game by making it too easy. Intended play is somewhat different. There's a very thin line between intended play and dominant strategy, especially for multiplayer games. When talking about strategies, you should not have a dominant strategy. Look at all the updates online games get after they go live, where they start fixing all the dominant strategies. Yes, but if we're talking about buff that's hard to get, I don't see it as a dominant strategy anymore. I see it as an intended play, okay, of a higher degree of complexity, but still I put it in the intended play box rather than dominant strategy. Okay, so thank you so much for the questions. We have about 10 minutes left. If you've got any more questions, just shoot them there and I'll try to answer them by email. Okay, and now updates about the course. So the Discord invites will be coming in soon for everyone who has the Discord perk. So please, 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 if you have the Discord perk and you're seeing this right now, add to your email address, the one you've used on Indiegogo, victor@levelsandmaps.com, to your contact list, because I will send you from this address, victor@levelsandmaps.com, your link for the Discord channel. So the plan is, let's say starting Wednesday, to actually start the Discord channel, because we've got Easter now going on for those of us who live in Catholic countries. So by Wednesday we should have sent those invites and everyone should be on board the Discord channel. As usual, it is the moment to be jolly. We have special perks only for the attendants. Power user perk. So you get a special discount for the power user perk, plus lifetime access to the course, your naming credits, and of course you can join in the Discord channel as soon as we get it going, which is in like 3 days from now. So if anyone wants these special power user perks, so we can run the course content together on Discord before we actually put it on Udemy, just to make sure we iron out everything and everyone's on the same page, just shout out in here and we can, option 1, send you the link right now through a private message, but just shout something in the chat window. And we'll send the link anyway through a follow-up email after the webinar is done. There are a limited amount of slots, so jump in, first one to get it, first one to have it. Also, only 4 slots available for a special discounted private tutor where we will work the course together. One-on-one on Skype or whatever your favorite means of digital communication is, 45 minutes per week for 8 sessions, not necessarily stringed together in one week after another, in your own time as you're going through the course, to give you enough time to work on the course, then come back with questions, challenges, and anything else you might think about. CTV, yes, we're already kind of doing that, but not one-on-one, because CTV is following these webinars and then I follow his Twitch streams, which by the way should start in about 8 minutes, right CTV? So, if anyone wants access to any of these 2 perks, heavily discounted for the webinar attendees, just shout out there in the chat. We'll try to send it to you via private message, and we'll also put the link in the follow-up email for the webinar. Thank you everyone for being here, and we wish you all a super happy Easter. We'll try to catch our strength and catch our breath with a low difficulty challenge during Easter, anytime CTV, and hopefully we'll see as many of you as possible during the course, and hopefully on the Discord channel as well. So without further ado, thank you everyone, super happy Easter, see you soon on Discord, bye bye.